were some good things about this movie, and there were some things that were just downright shameful. Let's talk about all of it. Hey, what's going on, Nerd fam? This is your boy Gashawn. I want to welcome you to Enter the Nerd. Today we're talking about the movie The Woman King. I actually was very much anticipating seeing this movie for a couple of reasons, because I have long been a proponent of movies that are detailing African lore, history, that aren't based off of a European nation, right? That it isn't like a race swap. This is something that actually comes from Africa. Albeit there were a lot of liberties taken in this, which I'll get in on more like the second half of this video. But there were some major positives that I think if we allow ourselves to be objective, we should be able to take from this. And I think there were people on both sides. Either it's the greatest thing in the world, or this is the worst thing in the world. And I think if we're able to really extrapolate some really good information here, we can see that it's a little bit of both, right? And let's get into that. So the positives of this movie. The acting, number one, whether it's Viola Davis, Lashana Lynch, or John Boyega, all of the cast didn't dial it in. Like they didn't phone it in, meaning like they didn't give a lazy acting job. When it came to their presence on screen, you felt it in every single scene, as well as their physical transformation that they all went through. The fight scenes were shot in a lot of wide angles, so you were able to see them perform a lot, which is awesome. As a person who's a really big stickler on fight choreography, was it everything perfect? No, because a lot of these women are not action stars, but they did as much as they possibly could, and you could tell because there were like a lot of videos of them training and stuff like that. They did as much as they could to the best of their ability, and I can appreciate that type of dedication to the role. Absolutely. Now, there was also like the story they were trying to tell here that the Home Amazon, or the Agoje, that was who they were, right? They were like this elite fighting force that was there to protect the empire of the Home, right? And stop slavery, right? To stop slavery from their people. They were actually still doing slavery, but only to their enemies, the people who are trying to come after them, which we'll get into later is why that's still inaccurate. But still, they were more benevolent. And the leader, Viola Davis, was telling the king, Gezo, who's also real, because Viola's character isn't real, but she's named after a person that might have existed. But Gezo was real, that king. And she's telling him, maybe we should do palm oil, and that should be what we're doing. And, he's like, hey, let me know. Telling the king, hey, we should maybe explore other things that are not slave trade. You don't need to do these are our own people, all of Africa is our people. That's their message, right? And all these women are all getting over traumas, right? She had the trauma, she was captured and raped at some point. Everyone has like a trauma, all these women, and them being part of the Agoje gives them purpose and meaning to get over trauma and to be of service to their king and their empire and their people, to be like a beacon of hope almost, right? That's the story they're trying to tell here. Okay, I get it. Do I wish to, or there's some parts that were kind of predictable, the whole Viola Davis, Nausicaa, that's the general's name, her character's name, the whole twist about who her daughter is. That was done very fast, extremely predictable. Quite literally, everyone guessed it in the theater where I was at out loud. They all said it, which is pretty funny. Either way, it is what it is. But the biggest takeaway that I had from this movie positively was that since it has so much respect for the weaponry, the outfits, showing what the empire looked like, even some of like the other, because we knew like this is West Africa, so they got that terrain correct. You could absolutely make other movies that are taking place in different aspects of the African continent, not country, because it is a whole continent, that have different geographical features, different lore, different god. It's so many things that could happen here. You can treat Africa like they treat medieval Europe, when they tell 1,000 different stories in France and England, and they all take place in like similar places. You could do this with Africa. You could get tons of cool warrior stories, cool king, queen, princess stories. There's tons of things that are there. And if you go into the detail and you tell all these stories, it's really limitless. Africa is virtually untouched when it comes to really getting into the story and history. And this was a good example of at least what could be. If you can peer into the future a bit and go, okay, they can do this here. Now, this positive leads into the negative. The negative is when you have historical pieces like this, I believe it's your obligation to actually tell what happened and not just tell what makes you feel good. And I think this film, for me, who knew what was going on, I know some people don't care because there were people who were just cheering and clapping for everything. It was cathartic to them in a way, and I'll speak about why that is. But it was not accurate as to who these people were. Those Amazons, the Empire, the King, their motivations were not what they were in this film. They were all for slavery because that was the lifeblood of the country. Even though Gezo at some point did try to exploit palm oil, but once it wasn't lucrative, he just went right back to it. It is what it is. And there were neighboring African nations that they were raiding that never went into the slave trade. They were never trying to do it, but they were weaker. And that empire, the Home Empire, actually was exploiting them, selling children, women, doing some human sacrifice, even though that was exaggerated a bit. It wasn't that crazy. Regardless, the slavery part is huge for them. They were not these benevolent people. The Amazons weren't like, well, all of Africa. That's not what was happening. And the positioning of them as superheroes is disingenuous, especially when I heard like Viola Davis's comments like, you know, if you don't support this, you're not supporting women superheroes. Perhaps you should say, you know, maybe this shouldn't have been positioned like that. Perhaps it should have been, you know, if you want to see something that's actually based on African history that isn't from something race swapped that you can at least read up on, and even if we're not exactly accurate, you can at least read the real history. Maybe she should have said something like that rather than trying to position it, oh, like, you know, you like Spider-Man, you like Iron Man, you should be watching this. That's a conflation. That's not genuine. And the problem with this is there is a notion, specifically for me is what I'm saying, you don't have to agree. When you don't tell this, the real history of it, then you set a narrative where it's like, oh, everything in Africa was all good until the Europeans came. Like, there was no such thing as slavery. They brought that over. Yes, the transatlantic slave trade was from bringing slaves from there to different places, whether it's Europe, France, to the Americas. Yes, there's that. But slavery did exist in Africa, whether they were trading, they were taking slaves from other tribes to be in their country, or they were selling to Arabs as well. That was a big thing. Slavery, the institution, has been around forever, everywhere. Transatlantic slave trade, that's something very, very specific. But to act like Africa was in this peaceful place with each other before European settlers, no. As a matter of fact, the British, they don't show this in the film, the British were actually shutting down some of the ports of Dahomey to abolish slavery. But that doesn't go with the narrative that all Europeans are what they were. I mean, to be honest, even the guy that's supposed to represent Francisco, the dude that was in real life, that was helping Gezo, because that guy helped him get into power over his brother and helped build Dahomey to what it was based off of slave labor. But you would think that everything was reluctant. I really don't want slaves. No, it was about what was profitable. Gezo wanted what was profitable. That's why when he went to palm oil and realized he couldn't make a profit, he went right back to slavery. As well as there were other tribal nations that had to rebel, come together and rebel against him because they were like, this is dirty. Like, you really are selling like your own people, so we have to stop you. That's real history. If it were me making this film, I would have still portrayed the Agoje as like, you know, elite warriors, but then I would have turned it on its head when you realize they're using all that skill to subjugate other Africans. Because you need to see it. And yes, they could have still had good camaraderie with each other and felt some kind of way. But guess what? Horrible people can have good relationships with people as well. You can have people, it's the duality of human beings. They can go there and do horrible stuff to other people and then come back to their home and have high fives and think that they're just amazing people while doing other messed up stuff because they had good relationships with people who are in their country. But then when it comes to people who are not there, are willing to do whatever it is to survive or be profitable. And that's a much more accurate story. And yes, it's not pretty. No, it doesn't make you feel good. But it is the history. And I think we do have that responsibility when you're making something fictional. Sorry, like that's a historical fiction or whatever you want to do. Why not? Because if not, you're just, what are you saying that I guess Black people or Africans aren't allowed, they have to always be benevolent and they have to always be trauma ridden and it all stems from Europeans? That just wouldn't factually be true because everybody does fucked up shit to everyone, to be quite honest with you. And like I said, history kind of dictates that. Once again, this is not a bad movie by just movie standards. But as far as what they were injecting into it, oh, one more positive thing. They did have they were injecting some modern conversations about how Viola Davis had, a child out of rape, and even the child of rape feeling kind of guilty about just living from that. That's kind of a modern conversation. I didn't mind it. It was kind of, because you could think that people probably had those conversations hundreds of years ago too. I did like that too. But going back to this, they had the opportunity to be 100% real with this and set some things straight and get people thinking and perhaps researching a bit more and understanding that ugly things were happening in Africa before a European even stepped forward. And no, the transatlantic slave trade, even it happened, it had to be purveyed by the Africans that were there because these guys could not get into the interior of Africa like that. They were not outnumbering Africans. That's just, the logistics don't make any sense. And mind you, they were competing with the oil empire because they were also selling slaves. So it wasn't just the homemade. It was other African nations that were selling slaves. This was a thing. It is what it is. But I think there are plenty of stories that we can still tell that have nothing to do with slavery at all, and just about battles, kings, royalty, love, and they all are in the continent of Africa. And I'm actually going to make a video about that. That's going to be pretty cool. So let me know what you thought about the movie if you saw it. Did you like it? Did you love it? Something in between? Either way, let's have that conversation. Like and subscribe to the channel if you like what you just saw or any of the other videos. Until then, let's keep on looking at history. Let's make sure that it's accurate and into the nerd.